see. Let's go with Steve in Arkansas. Hopefully you're doing well.
I think you'll find it's pronounced Arkansas.
Hey, guys. Can you hear me all right?
Hey, Steve. How you doing?
Hey, how you doing? I'm doing pretty well.
That was the call ever. I'm sorry. That was just, I don't even know how the fuck you guys talked to that guy for that long. And then you went on and talked about it for like 5 more minutes.
Yep.
The last
Brutal.
5 minutes was probably more interesting to Matt than the rest of the call.
Oh, I thought you were saying it was more interesting to Matt than most of the rest of the people listening. Because I was like, I totally did that for your benefit, Steve.
None of that interesting at all.
Mm.
I'm
I'm glad that there's an objective measure of interesting.
Yeah, none.
Yeah, earned a title.
What do you got for us?
So it says here you had an experience that's keeping you from being an atheist?
Yeah, kind of, yeah. We've spoke before, probably back in December, and I don't even know how much time we have left here, but...
as much time as I decide to give you.
Boom.
Be nice.
Oh, cool. Well, I can at least promise it's going to be more interesting than the last one. So it's not a very big promise. But so I began to doubt my faith in God in around October. And I became an atheist for probably 3 or 4 months. I spent a lot of time watching, the atheist experience and Talk Heathen and some Anthony Monabosco stuff too, and that kind of stuff. And really, before I had my doubts, though, in my last few months where I would consider myself a Christian, I had some experiences that have kind of become like a pebble in my shoe that have been hard for me to kind of shake it,
Okay.
And,
so what are those, if you don't mind me directing that?
Yeah, sure. So I probably have a pretty good clue of what you're going to say, but when it's personal to you, it's hard to,
Yeah.
Isn't that the obvious problem? I mean, when you say when it's personal to you, it's hard to move past this. That's correct, because we're biased, and that's why we seek to remove bias and deal with things objectively. Because if we don't, we run the risk of saying, well, I feel like I'm in a relationship, and that is a relationship that is entirely about your bias. But go ahead.
Yeah. All right, so...
what were your experiences?
I was... you know how sometimes we lay in bed at night, we're trying to fall asleep, and
That is usually how I go to bed, but...
yeah, definitely. Little things cross our minds as the process goes on, and eventually we fall asleep, and I was thinking about, like, childhood kind of things, and how I never really had, like, what I would consider, like, really good grandfathers, and I was thinking how the closest person I had to a grandfather was this particular uncle I had. And I thought of his son, whom I hadn't thought of in a long time. And he's an old man by now, too. But I hadn't thought of this guy in forever. His name's Jerry. And this is going to seem somewhat, inconsequential to you. But it's very strange that I would ever think of this guy, because I hadn't seen him. I'm 39 now. I hadn't seen him in probably 36 years, approximately. But I never think of him at all.
Mm-hmm.
So my dad, who lives in Denver, Colorado, and was divorced from my mother at the age of 3, and was only related to Jerry through law, legally by, he was in-law. But he has even far less reason to think of this man, right?
Okay, so he's like a relative you guys don't think about very much.
Yeah, he's deeply into the archives of our lives, right? Way back there.
The back of your mind never would expect it. So you remembered him as you were falling asleep.
Right.
Did something happen then? Okay.
Yeah, the very next day, my dad texts me from Colorado and says, "Whatever happened to Jerry Frazier?" And I was like, kind of like shocked that he was asking me this, because I thought how crazy it was that I was thinking of the man. And here he is the next day. He's thinking of the guy too. and I started calculating the odds that I would even think of them, then trying to extrapolate.
How do you do that, by the way?
I would.
How do you calculate the odds that you would think of somebody?
Well, I did a pretty simple measurement of how many days I've been alive since a certain age, and just did the percentage.
But you don't know what it is. You don't know what it is that made you. You don't know what it is that made you think of that person. Perhaps.
Sure. Go ahead.
Perhaps you have a memory of, and this is completely hypothetical. It can go 100,000 different ways. You have a memory of you and your uncle watching a particular, let's say, sporting event. And you've forgotten about that because it just doesn't come up. And you and your dad also like sporting events. And so you're sitting around watching a sporting event, and something that the announcer says, which you would never expect, triggers a memory. And you heard it.
Yeah.
And your dad heard it, which prompted both of you to think about this person. And of course, you and your dad are the people that you're most likely to reach out to talk about it. Now, I'm not saying that's what happened, but that's the kind of thing that happens all the time. Our brain makes connections. Maybe the two of you were reminded of your uncle independently, and it's just a big coincidence. Maybe there was something that prompted both of you to think of him. But here's the thing. If this is a stumbling block, if this is a pebble in your shoe that's keeping you...
That's not the end of the story, though. It actually becomes much more.
So here,
anyway,
let's... wow.
Sorry, I was going to say...
Nope.
Did something...
I'm not going to interject. Go ahead.
So
he hasn't finished his story, and I didn't finish mine, but go ahead.
Sorry, I was just going to say, so I don't know what the end of the story is. I don't think you're going to end by saying, and then my uncle laid on hands and performed a miracle, etc. So then something that happens. So let me ask this about the end of your story. Did then something happen that involves either you, your uncle, or your dad that also often happens with other people?
Rest of it, no, because it really kind of takes a total deviation.
Okay, but does it happen? Right here, wait, then what happened with your uncle?
Okay, that was with him, all right? And then there was other things as well, okay? There was something else that happened also that is other than the uncle story.
Wait, so sorry, I'm confused. Is there more to the uncle story, or is that...
That's basically it with him.
Oh,
yes.
Okay. I'm sorry I interrupted you, Matt.
So how is that a pebble in your shoe? Because
I'm about to tell you the rest. Okay. Just let me go ahead and tell you. Can we?
Well, you just said the uncle story was over.
Yeah. So Matt was.
So what was the fucking point of the uncle story?
The crazy odds that we would think of someone.
You don't know what the odds are. You don't know what the odds are. And look, so I asked you how this was a pebble in your shoe, and now you want to go on to tell another story. The uncle story is over. How is the uncle story in any way a pebble in your shoe other than something unlikely or seemingly unlikely seemed to happen?
Well, that was when I was still in my believing hour, and he's a Bible teacher, and I thought that it was God, trying to give me a sign.
Exactly. What kind of weak-ass, pathetic fucking God decides to demonstrate how much he loves and cares about you by making you have a weird recollection of an uncle that might be shared by somebody else? What? God works in mysterious ways, doesn't he? So clearly, once I'm convinced that God works in mysterious ways, when I come across something mysterious, that must be a pebble in my shoe, keeping me believing in a God. What about the story of your uncle in any way demonstrates or could reasonably lead anyone to conclude that there's a God?
Yeah, I totally agree with that.
Okay,
I get it.
So real quick,
I would tell the same. I would tell the same thing to somebody else who was telling me a story too.
I was going to say, let me jump in here because I don't want my co-host.
I need him to finish.
Brain to literally explode. So basically, the impression that I'm getting is here's this thing that happened when I was a believer, and the memory of that thing has stuck with me, and it seemed like at the time that it was a sign from God. Do you believe that it was a sign from God now?
More on the side of no, because as I've kind of separated for myself emotionally from it, and time has gone by, it's become less and less meaningful. And I start to see it more objectively, like I would have seen it if somebody else was telling me the same shit.
So let me make sure I'm clear.
Basically, it gives the same answers I'm getting from you.
Let me make sure I'm clear.
Yeah.
Something happened that you told us about, which you don't think is relevant to the discussion of whether or not there's a God.
No, I think it's relevant, or I wouldn't be calling you.
You just said you no longer thought it was evidence for the existence of God.
Steve, do you think it's relevant for people to consider the existence of God, or do you think it's relevant to how your mind is working when considering whether or not there's a God?
Choice B.
Yeah, I didn't want to go here. I've got a prediction as far as how the call is going to go, because it would be presumptuous and harmful to the call. But it seems like this is a thing that you've said, I have removed myself from it emotionally. Good for you. That's the thing that needs to happen. This is the I'm struggling with the hooks that are still in my brain from belief, right? Those are hooks that are barbed, and so they're really, really fucking difficult to address or surgically remove, even
Unless
when you know that
Matt,
they should. Well,
right?
I mean, I don't know. I've never been Matt, but what I would say is
never will be.
Basically, this call to me seems like every call where it's, you know, someone is in a relationship and it's bad, but they've got emotional baggage, so they get together or they call their girlfriends to say, hey, am I crazy for thinking that I should leave this guy? Oh my God, we've been together for whatever.
Except it's not that, because he already acknowledged the story is irrelevant.
Yeah. Well, so let me say this, which is that I've got this mug. I think I've earned the title, girl, drop his ass, leave him behind. You're an atheist. It's fine.
Yeah, that's not going to do it.
I know, but it's hopefully going to help reflection on it.
So go ahead and finish your story.
What else you got?
Your second story that is the relevant one, I'm assuming?
Yeah, it's by far the more relevant one.
We should have started there.
Anyways, I probably should have started there.
No, I'm telling you, you definitely should have started with something relevant and not something irrelevant.
Well, I thought I was going to be able to finish the whole thing before having to, defend.
So you never watched me before. Sorry.
What's the second part?
All right. I don't think there's anything of you I haven't seen.
Okay.
So I'm a fan.
You can't be surprised at this point, then.
I'm not surprised.
All right, let's get to the relevant story.
Okay, fine. So I'm talking to an old worship pastor on the phone one night about my feelings. I'm being pretty honest with him about everything I'm thinking. And he's trying his hardest to, get me to not go away and quit believing. And he tells me, probably a story you've heard 1,000 times yourself, where someone needs money, they don't tell no one they need money, and all of a sudden the money shows up in the mailbox.
And it's the exact amount.
It's the exact amount of money, right?
Yeah. Do you believe those stories are ever completely accurate?
No. So
me neither. So how is this story relevant?
Hold on, Matt.
I'm with you. I'm just trying to direct traffic so that we get to the point.
I know you are. Just give me a green light for
green light. Floor it. Get there.
Okay. All right.
Sorry.
So I would have already been halfway done. But anyways, here we go. So,
but you keep telling us how you would have been done, and you keep going on with the relevant stories. You're way further than halfway done. I'll shut up now.
All right. So I tell him, that's fine. I don't put any sort of value on those kind of things. It sounds ridiculous. And so the next day, my wife needed me to go to the post office, and I was real excited because I had basically decided, I don't believe anymore. I guess I'm an atheist, and I was kind of excited about it. And I had one friend in the world who I know is an atheist, and I was excited to tell him. And I go to the post office, and the first person I see is him.
Who?
We walked up there. Yeah, we were the first people there at the post office.
So he's asking who?
Your atheist friend?
Yeah.
Okay.
A sign from God.
He's the first person I see that. So, I go up, I tell him, I'm totally pumped up, and we're talking about it. He's like, whatever. So finally, I get home. I'm cutting the story super short here. for the sake of brevity and not wasting your time with stories you've heard a million times. But I get to the house, and my wife's like, "Here, this came in the mail for you." And I was kind of spooked a little bit by that, considering the conversation I'd had the night before and a few things that happened in the interim in between that happening and getting home the next day. And basically, I look at the screen here on TV, and it gives me like a total what the fuck ever face. So anyways, I go inside to open the envelope, and it's something that my aunt had sent me from my grandma's funeral a year prior. It was all the childhood pictures, of me from like way back in the archives, things I'd never seen before. And I had this like feeling, a Christian would call it like a conviction, that God was saying, "See, I've had my hand on you your entire life." That's kind of like the feeling I had, and that right there, I still continued down my searching, and basically I continued with my absolution that I was no longer a believer, and it's never let me go. It's like a hook that I just can't get out, and I feel like no matter how I know all the epistemology, I know all the things.
No,
I
you don't.
say to somebody who is telling, yes, I do. I know those things, but still, it doesn't matter when it's emotional.
So I think
It does. That's the point.
I think I can actually summarize this call and then say, "Hey, Steve, call us back again when you're gonna declare you're an atheist." Just predictions. So Steve, yeah, the power of religious indoctrination is extreme. There are people that wake up 50 years after deconverting from a nightmare about hell, right? Because the parts of your brain that are emotional are, in many cases, powerful enough to override your reason. Keep pursuing that reason. I think it'll lead you to a place where you're much happier, and the conclusions that you reach are either more rational or less hindered by I had a feeling and therefore it's going to influence my beliefs. But I think we're gonna try and hit at least one other call in here.
I just want to make sure I understand this. Once upon a time, you had an uncle that you hadn't thought about in a while, and you thought about your uncle. And then your dad also happened to think about your uncle, but none of that matters because you were asked to go after having talked to a pastor friend of yours who gave you some standard trope about somebody needing money, and the exact money comes up. You then went to a post office where you ran into your atheist friend, which also is apparently irrelevant because the real story is you got back home, and in the mail were pictures of you and your family, and this is what convinced you to stick with God.
Yep, I guess that's the long and short of it. Pretty lame.
So my question would be, examine whether or not it's a thing that should convince you, and whether or not that being convinced is the result of like an emotional response to your indoctrination, or whether it's a more logical conclusion of the inputs to that reasoning process. But then, sorry, Steve, to like steamroll the end of this call, but I think we gotta get to other callers. Feel free to call back in.
I'll talk about divorce and marriage and something like that.
Yeah, because
I think Matt was certainly more interested in this call than the last one. But I guess we're gonna let you go and hit the other ones. Sorry it was rough. Glad we were laughing all the way through, and good luck to you.